I didn't come back to beg. I'm standing on the same porch I left a decade ago, except my hands aren't shaking this time. They're steady, because in my pocket is a cashier's check and in my head is one sentence. I'm not here to ask. I'm here to buy. The front door looks smaller than I remember. When you're 18 and someone tells you you're out, that door feels like a wall. When you're 28 and you've worked your way back, it's wood and paint and a lock that can change owners. And the person on the other side of it? My stepmother. The woman who used to say, "my house," like it was a spell. Like if she said it enough, I'd disappear. She didn't just want me gone. She wanted the story to be that I was the kind of kid who never amounted to anything. The kind you can throw out and forget. That's what most people think happens. Clean break. You fade into the background while life moves on without you. But the middle years don't fade. They grind. No one sees it happen. Nights counting coins for dinner. Jobs you take just to keep a roof. Friends you don't call because you're embarrassed. Decisions you make in silence that nobody claps for. So when I knock, I'm not chasing a movie moment. I'm cashing in 10 years of being underestimated. I can already tell what she's expecting when she opens that door. An apology, a plea, "can I talk to you?" She's about to get paperwork. And if you're wondering how someone goes from being shoved out at 18 to buying the same house at 28, good. Because that 10-year gap is where everything changed. Where do you think I slept the first night I had nowhere to go? The house, the rules, and the new family. Before I ever got thrown out, I lived in a weird in-between. On paper, it was my home. My address was there. My clothes were in a drawer upstairs. But the feeling was like I'd been allowed to borrow a corner of somebody else's life. My dad remarried when I was still learning how to breathe after our old family broke. He wasn't cruel. He was just tired. He wanted quiet, and he believed quiet meant everything was fine. My stepmother spotted that weakness immediately. At the start, she was charming. That's the part people miss. Nobody walks in wearing a sign that says, "I'm about to make your life smaller." It begins with family dinners, and we're all adjusting. Then the rules show up one by one, dressed up as common sense. Text me when you're coming home. Sure. Shoes by the back door. Fine. Those snacks are for the weekend. Okay. Then it shifts. Ask before you use the washer. Ask before you have a friend over. Ask before you shower late. Ask before you turn the heat up. Not because she needed the info, because the act of asking trained me to feel like I didn't belong there unless she approved it. And she had this habit with words. My dad would say, "our place," and she'd correct him like she was fixing a child. My house. Always always a reminder that I was living in someone else's territory. She also kept score like an accountant. One dish in the sink and it was, "we don't leave messes here." Even if the dishwasher was still running. If I sat on the couch too long, she'd ask if I had homework. Not because she cared, but because the living room was her space to grant. Once she lowered the thermostat in winter and told me, "if you're cold, put on another layer and quit acting entitled." If I walked into the kitchen and she was already there, she wouldn't say hi. She'd say, "what are you doing?" Not curious. More like a security guard checking a badge. When guests were around, she played a different role. She'd introduce me like I was a favor she tolerated. If I did well in school, she'd praise me loudly in front of people. If I messed up, she'd keep it quiet and personal. That contrast was the point. Applause for the audience. Control behind closed doors. I learned there were two versions of the house. There was the one other people saw. Clean counters, framed photos, the vibe of a fresh start. And then there was the real one. The tension when I heard her car pull in. The way I'd hesitate before opening the fridge because I didn't want a lecture that ended with, "in my house." My dad floated between those two worlds like a man trying not to pick a side. If she snapped at me, he'd mumble, "hey, be nice," and then retreat to the TV. He wasn't defending me, he was negotiating for peace. People think control is yelling. Sometimes it is. But the most effective control is quiet. It's the constant reminder that you're tolerated, not wanted. It's living like one mistake could cost you your spot at the table. Even my room didn't feel like mine. No painting. No rearranging. She'd tidy while I was gone, which sounds helpful until you realize it means nothing is private. Once I came home and the little lockbox I kept under my bed was sitting out, open, empty. She never explained. She didn't have to. And then there was my 18th birthday. In most families, 18 is freedom. In mine, it became a countdown. She'd joke about it like it was cute. Better start saving. Adult world's coming. She said it with that thin smile, like she was talking about weather, not my future. I didn't get it at first. I thought she meant the normal thing, responsibility. I tried harder. More chores. Less attitude. I stopped asking for anything that wasn't necessary. I thought if I made myself small enough, she'd stop targeting me. Making yourself small doesn't make people kinder. It makes them bolder. The closer my birthday got, the more she used it like a line in the sand. When you're 18, you can do whatever you want. Translation, you won't be doing it here. And the first time it truly clicked wasn't even a fight. She was sorting the mail and held up an envelope with my name on it. Calm as anything, she said. Just so you know, once you're 18, you'll need to make your own arrangements. Arrangements. Like I was a cable plan. Like home was a service I was about to be cut off from. That's when the house stopped being a home and turned into a waiting room. I was still sleeping there, still eating dinner at that table, but now every day had a number on it. What was the first moment I realized turning 18 wasn't going to mean freedom? It was going to mean eviction. The pressure builds, death by 1,000 cuts. After that arrangements comment, every conversation felt like a test I didn't know I was taking. Not big blow-ups, little traps. A mug left to dry on the rack became a lecture about respect. A hoodie on the stair rail became proof I was careless. It was never about the mug or the hoodie. It was about building a file on me, one petty charge at a time. And it worked because I started living like I was on camera. I'd wipe the counter twice. I'd check the floor for crumbs that weren't mine. I'd listen for her footsteps before I opened my bedroom door. Most people think control looks like shouting. In that house, control looked like me tiptoeing so I wouldn't give her a reason. The craziest part? In public, she was warm. At school events, she'd hug me and tell teachers how proud she was. At family gatherings, she'd put a hand on my shoulder and say, "We're so lucky to have him." People would smile at me like I'd won the step-parent lottery. Then we'd get in the car and the mask would drop. "Don't embarrass me like that. Stop acting like you're better than us. Who do you think you are?" She had a talent for turning anything into my fault. If I stayed in my room, I was antisocial. If I came downstairs, I was in the way. If I ate dinner quietly, I was moody. If I talked, I was talking back. There was no setting where I could just exist. My dad saw pieces of it, but never the full pattern. She didn't need him to hate me. She just needed him tired. She'd pick a fight with me when he wasn't home. Then by the time he walked in, she'd be calm, already rinsing a plate, already the reasonable adult. I'd be the one with the shaky voice. Guess who sounded believable? Sometimes she'd bait me with kindness just to prove she could. She'd buy my favorite cereal, leave it on the counter like a peace offering, then later tell my dad, loud enough for me to hear, "I try so hard with him, but he's just ungrateful." I'd open the box and suddenly it wasn't food. It was evidence. The deadline got closer and the rules tightened. A new curfew appeared out of nowhere. My phone had to be on the kitchen charger at night, so you're not up texting. She started accidentally mixing my laundry with towels so my clothes came out ruined and then shrugging, "You should have done it earlier." Every inconvenience came with the same message. "You're temporary here, so don't get comfortable." I started hiding things like a squirrel. A little cash in an old textbook. My birth certificate slipped into a folder under the bed. Not because I was planning some big escape, but because a part of me finally believed she could do it. She could open the door one day and say, "Go," and my life would be reduced to whatever I could carry. That fear is different from normal teenage stress. It's not, "I hate my parents." It's, "I might not have a place to sleep." It makes you older overnight. You start calculating bus routes. You look at your friends' houses and wonder who's safest to ask. You look at the weather and think, if I get kicked out in winter, what then? I memorized shelters in case tonight was the night. And still, She'd do this tiny thing that kept me hoping. She'd be normal for a week. She'd laugh at a joke. She'd ask how school was. She'd even make my favorite meal. I'd relax just enough. Then she'd snap again, harder, like she was punishing me for believing. The fights started getting weirder too, like she was running out of excuses. She'd accuse me of slamming a door I barely touched. She'd say I was staring at her when I was literally just listening. Once she told my dad I'd rolled my eyes at her. I hadn't. But denial didn't matter. The story did. Her story. Here's the part that still messes with me. She'd set me up to fail, then act shocked when I did. She'd tell me to be independent, but block every path. When I applied for a part-time job, she complained the hours were inconvenient and said I couldn't use her car. When I asked my dad for a ride, she'd sigh so hard it sounded like I'd requested a private jet. She started dropping hints about rent not as a lesson but as a threat. Pay up or pack up. Every day I felt the floorboards loosening under my feet at any moment. By the time my birthday month hit, I could feel something coming. Not a conversation, a verdict. The house was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was that quiet right before a storm, when everyone is pretending they don't see the clouds. So what finally triggered the blow-up? The one that made, "I'll throw you out," turn into "pack your things"? The 18th birthday ultimatum. You're an adult now. My 18th birthday didn't feel like a milestone. Felt like a lease ending. The night before, I stared at the ceiling and tried to price out my life. Who could I call? How much could I carry? What would I do if the answer was no from everyone? Morning showed up pretending to be sweet. A cake on the counter. One candle. My dad hugged me and said he was proud. My stepmother smiled wide, like we were posing for a photo she could show other people later. We sat down with coffee and plates, and for a few minutes I let myself think, maybe I was wrong. Maybe she'd ease up. Maybe 18 would mean more freedom, not less. Then she cleared her throat and that room changed temperature. "So," she said, slow and careful, "now that you're an adult, we need to talk about expectations." My dad's eyes dropped to his mug. He knew where this was going. "This house runs on responsibility," she continued. "Adults contribute. Adults don't get free rides. Adult." She said it like a gavel. I tried to keep my voice flat. "Okay, what does that mean?" She didn't answer me at first. She looked at my dad. "It means he starts paying rent. And if he can't, he finds somewhere else. It's time." My stomach sank, but I still waited for my dad to laugh, to say, "Come on, he's in school." He didn't. He just swallowed and said, "Maybe we can figure out something reasonable." She smiled without warmth. "We've been reasonable. He's 18 now. The real world doesn't coddle you. Here's what people get wrong about teaching responsibility. Teaching is planning. Teaching is, let's map out a job, a budget, a timeline." What she was doing was eviction with a motivational quote taped to it. I asked, "How much rent are we talking?" She named a number that made my ears ring. It wasn't rent. It was a message: "You don't belong here." "I can help," I said. "I've got a part-time job coming. I just need a little time." That's when she finally turned her full attention to me, calm as a cashier. "Time is what you've had. When you're an adult, you handle your own problems." The audacity of it hit me. She was creating the problem and then pointing at it like proof I was failing. I looked at my dad again, begging him to pick a side. He rubbed his forehead, like the choice hurt. "Let's not do this today," he murmured. "No," she said. "Today is perfect. He needs to learn." "Learn what? That home is conditional? That love comes with a payment plan?" I felt my face get hot. "I'm not some random person," I said. "I'm your husband's kid." She leaned back in her chair. "And you're 18. Congratulations. You're grown." Grown people don't live off other people. The way she said other people was the sharpest part. Not family. Not us. Other people. I stood up because if I stayed seated, I was going to say something I couldn't take back. "Fine," I said. "When do you want me gone?" She didn't even blink. "By the end of the week." A week. A small mercy. Enough time to call around, to figure out a bed, to not be standing on the curb with a bag like a runaway. Then she stacked more rules on top, like she couldn't stand the idea of me having even temporary comfort. And until then, you'll follow my rules. No friends over. No coming in late. And leave your key on the hook when you go. I froze. Why would I leave my key? Because it's my house, she said, crisp and satisfied. And I'm not comfortable with you coming and going. There it was again. My house, my comfort, my decision, my power. My dad opened his mouth, and for half a second I thought he was going to step in. He didn't. He closed it and stared at the table like the wood grain had answers. The argument didn't turn into yelling. She didn't need volume. She had control. She stayed calm so I'd look emotional. She used that soft, reasonable tone that makes anyone who hears the story later think, well, maybe she had a point. At one point she got up, walked to the closet, and came back with a trash bag. She placed it on the table like she was setting down groceries. Start packing, she said. Let's not make this dramatic. And just like that, end of the week became right now. No negotiation, no compassion, no where will you go, just a bag and a deadline measured in minutes. I stared at my dad. Still nothing. So I went upstairs. My room looked the same, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. I grabbed clothes, my laptop, that folder with my documents I'd hidden weeks earlier because some part of me saw this coming. The worst part wasn't packing. It was choosing what version of my life deserved space in the bag. When I came back down, she watched like a supervisor checking work. My dad hovered by the door, helpless, guilty, quiet. I stepped outside with a trash bag full of my stuff, and the air hit my lungs like I'd been underwater. The street was normal. Cars rolled by. Someone walked a dog. A neighbor waved at another neighbor. Nobody looked at me twice. The world didn't care that something unfair had happened. It didn't care that adult was being used like a knife. I stood on that porch and realized being right doesn't keep you safe. It doesn't pay for a bed. It doesn't make anyone open their door. So if you get pushed out at 18 with no plan, where do you go first and who actually shows up? The 18th birthday ultimatum. You're an adult now. My 18th birthday was on a Tuesday. Not a party Tuesday. A bills and laundry Tuesday. I woke up to the smell of boxed cake mix and the sound of my stepmother humming like she was practicing being kind. In most houses, 18 means you get handed a little more rope. Later curfew. More say. Maybe a car key. In mine, 18 was a receipt. Proof that I was no longer a child. Therefore, no longer anyone's problem. Dad tried. He really did. He made coffee. Did that awkward hug where you can feel the apology in it, and said, "Happy birthday, kiddo." He slid an envelope across the counter. My stepmother set a single candle into the cake and smiled like a hostess. "Make a wish," she said, and something in her eyes told me I should wish fast. We ate 2 slices. We made small talk about school. For 5 minutes, I let myself believe the tension had been in my head. Then she rinsed her plate, dried her hands, and said, "Okay, now that you're an adult, we need to talk." The word adult landed like a door lock clicking. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She spoke the way people speak when they want witnesses, even when there aren't any. "Adults contribute," she said. "Adults don't get to live for free." Dad stared at his mug like it was interesting. "Maybe not today," he mumbled. "Today is exactly the day," she replied. "It's a good lesson. The real world doesn't care about birthdays." She turned to me. "You can start paying rent, or you can start making plans to move out. Your choice." Most people hear that and think it's fair. Tough love. Responsibility. But responsibility is a plan, not a trap. Responsibility is, here's a budget. Here's a timeline. Here's how we help you learn. What she offered was a cliff and a lecture. I asked how much. She named a number that was just high enough to be impossible and just low enough to sound reasonable if you didn't know my paycheck. I laughed once, not because it was funny, but because my brain needed a second to catch up. "I'm in school," I said. "I work weekends. I can't do that." She nodded like that proved her point. "Then you'll need to find somewhere else. You're grown." There it was again. You're grown. Not a compliment. A weapon. I looked at Dad. This was the moment he could have said, "No." He stays. That's what I was waiting for. Not a fight. Just a sentence. He rubbed his forehead. "We'll figure something out," he said, soft to nobody. My stepmother's smile tightened. "We already did." Then the rules started changing in real time. "Also," she added, "since you're leaving, I don't want people in and out. No friends over. No coming home late. And leave your key on the hook when you go." I blinked. "Why would I leave my key? I still live here." She tilted her head. "Do you?" "Because I don't feel comfortable with you having access to my house once you're an adult." My house. That phrase again. Not our home. Not your room. My house, like I was an intruder with a toothbrush. I felt my throat tighten. "You're acting like I'm dangerous." She shrugged. "You're acting like you're entitled. That's the trick with people like that. They can't win on facts, so they rename your needs as character flaws. A bed becomes entitlement. A key becomes a threat." Dad finally spoke up, barely. "Come on, he's not." She cut him off. "If you want to keep babying him, that's your choice. But I'm not doing it." And then she did the thing that made it real. She stood, walked to the closet, and came back with a black trash bag. Thick plastic. The kind you use for yard waste. She set it on the table with a gentle thump. "Start packing," she said. "Let's not drag this out." A week ago, she'd been joking about me saving up. This morning, she'd lit a candle. Now she was handing me a bag like I was cleaning out a garage. I stood there frozen, waiting for Dad to say, "Absolutely not." He didn't move. His silence felt louder than any yelling. So I went upstairs and started pulling my life off shelves. Shirts, jeans, my beat-up laptop, a couple photos I didn't want her touching, the folder with my birth certificate and social security card, the one I'd hidden because I didn't trust that it would stay mine. Every item I grabbed came with a question. Will I need this to survive? Or is this just proof I existed here? Downstairs, she checked her phone like she was waiting for a delivery. When I carried the bag down, she didn't look at my face. She looked at the bag, as if measuring whether I'd taken too much. Dad followed me to the door. He opened it, and for a second he looked like he might say something useful. Something fatherly. Instead he said, "Call me later. Okay?" Later. Like this was a misunderstanding. Like time would soften it. I stepped onto the porch with a trash bag of clothes and a heart full of heat. The air was cold. The street was normal. A neighbor backed out of a driveway. A kid rode by on a bike. Nobody slowed down. Nobody asked why an 18-year-old was standing there holding his whole life in a bag. That was the cliff. Not her words. Not the door closing. The realization that the world doesn't pause for unfairness. I had nowhere to go, and I had to pick a direction before the tears did it for me. So where do you go first when home disappears? And who actually answers? The first night out and the first lesson. By the time the door clicked behind me, the trash bag in my hand felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the clothes, because it was proof I could be erased in one morning. I walked to the end of the driveway and just stood there. My phone was in my pocket, but it might as well have been a brick. I scrolled through contacts like I was defusing a bomb. Who do you call when you've been kicked out and you're embarrassed, broke, and technically an adult now? First I called the friend I thought was my brother. Straight to voicemail. Second call, my aunt. She answered, heard my voice, and went quiet. What happened? I told her. She sighed and said, I can't get involved with your dad's marriage. That was my welcome to adulthood. People choosing comfort over you. I started walking because standing still made me look like a problem. The sun was bright, like the day had no idea my life just cracked in half. I had $23, a bus pass with 2 rides left, and the kind of panic that makes you want to spend money just to feel safe for an hour. Here's the part nobody tells you. Dignity has fees. You need cash to use a laundromat. Cash to eat something that isn't humiliating. Cash to charge your phone when you don't have an outlet. Cash for a cheap lock because suddenly every stranger feels like a threat. If you don't have cash, you start paying with pride. I made a list in my head of what I had and what I didn't. I had a folder of documents. I had a change of clothes. I had a half-charged phone. I did not have a bed. I did not have a plan. And I definitely didn't have a parent stepping in to say, "Come home." That envelope Dad slid me? Inside was $40 and a card that said, "Love you." No address, no spare key, just love folded into paper. I stared at it like it was supposed to solve something. $40 buys you 1 motel night if you don't eat, or 2 bus rides if you don't sleep. I put the cash in my shoe, because suddenly I trusted my sock more than my pockets. I tried one more number, a friend's mom who used to offer me leftovers after school. She picked up and didn't ask for the whole story. She just said, "Where are you?" When I told her, she said, "Get to my place. You can sleep on the couch tonight." One night. That's the kind of help you get when you're in free fall. Not rescue. A single handhold. On the bus, I stared out the window at normal houses and felt myself getting angry at paint and grass. People were making dinner plans. I was calculating how many nights a couch could last before I became a burden. When I got there, her mom hugged me, handed me a plate, and then, gently, laid down the truth I needed. "You can stay tonight," she said, "but tomorrow you need a plan. I can't fight your family for you." That sentence was the first lesson. Nobody saves you because your situation is sad. They help when they see you trying not to drown. They help when you make it easy to help you. When you show up with gratitude, not chaos. That night I slept in jeans on a couch that smelled like fabric softener and somebody else's life. I didn't really sleep. I listened to the house settle and kept thinking about my room back there. The stuff I left behind. Childhood trophies. Old photos. The little evidence that I belonged anywhere. In one day it had all become their property. And somewhere in the middle of that long, shaky night, another thought crept in, colder and steadier than anger. One day, I'm going to be the person who can't be pushed around by a door and a signature. Not to hurt anyone. Not to play some revenge scene. Just to close the loop. To know, in my bones, that no one gets to decide I'm disposable. But survival doesn't care about your future speeches. Morning was coming, and I still didn't know where I'd be tomorrow night. So when you're in survival mode, how do you avoid making choices that trap you for the next 10 years? The loser years that built the winner. People love a comeback story, but they skip the part where you look exactly like you're losing. The first year out, I became a professional guest. 1 week on a friend's couch, 3 nights at another place, 2 nights back at the first because I'd worn out my welcome everywhere else. I learned to wake up before everyone so I wasn't the reason the house felt crowded. I folded blankets tight, washed my own dishes, and tried to leave no trace, like I was sneaking through my own life. During the day, I worked whatever would pay fast. Stocking shelves, washing dishes, moving boxes. If a manager promised more hours next week, I smiled like I believed him, then went home and did the math again. Rent was a moving target because my bed was a moving target. Some months I paid cash to a buddy's older brother for a room with a door that didn't lock. Other months I traded favors, babysitting, yard work, anything that kept me indoors. From the outside I looked fine. I still showed up to school. I still posted the occasional joke online. If you asked, I'd say, "I'm good." That's what you say when the truth is too long and too embarrassing. The reality was I was tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. Tired from always scanning for the next problem. Tired from carrying every important document in my backpack because I didn't trust any safe spot that wasn't on my body. And the shame, that part was loud. Every time a classmate complained about their parents being strict, I wanted to laugh and scream at the same time. They had rules. I had nowhere. They were saving for spring break. I was saving for toothpaste and bus fare. It gets worse before it gets better because your mistakes cost more when you're broke. Miss one shift because the bus is late and now you're short on rent. Lose your phone for a day and you miss the call for an interview. Eat the cheap meal because it's cheap and now you're sick and now you miss work and now you're short again. People call it a cycle like it's abstract. It's not abstract when you're living it. It's a chain and every link is a tiny embarrassment. I remember standing in line at a temp agency at 6 in the morning with men twice my age, all of us pretending we weren't desperate. A guy next to me said, "You young, you'll be all right." I nodded, but I didn't feel young. I felt behind. Every time I thought I was catching up, life moved the finish line. Friends started getting apartments with their names on the lease. They had couches they didn't have to earn. They bought groceries without calculating the exact total in their head. They talked about building credit like it was a hobby. Meanwhile, I was hoping my card wouldn't decline in front of the cashier because the humiliation cost more than the food. Here's a secret. The loser years aren't defined by failing. They're defined by surviving quietly while everyone assumes you're just lazy. When I finally got a steadier job, people acted like it came out of nowhere. Like I woke up one day and decided to be responsible. They didn't see the weeks I ate one meal a day so I could buy steel-toe boots for work. They didn't see me rehearse phone calls in a stairwell because I was terrified of sounding homeless. And anger was always there, humming under everything. Not movie anger. Small, constant anger. The kind that makes you clench your jaw on a bus ride because you're replaying the door shutting behind you. For a long time I thought that anger was fuel. Then I noticed what it was really doing. It was keeping me awake. It was making me spend money to feel better for 10 minutes. It was making me spend money to feel better for 10 minutes. It was pushing me into dumb arguments because I needed to win something. Anything. One night, after a double shift, I counted my cash on a mattress on the floor and realized I had worked 60 hours that week and was still one emergency away from disaster. Not because I wasn't trying. Because trying isn't a strategy. Trying is just motion. That was the moment the story in my head changed. Up until then, I wanted them to feel sorry. I wanted an apology. I wanted my dad to show up with a key and say, "Come home." But staring at that thin stack of bills, I understood something ugly and freeing. Nobody was coming. If I wanted stability, I had to build it like a person who couldn't afford to be emotional about it. My anger didn't disappear. It got redirected. Instead of using it to replay the past, I started using it to plan the next move. Not louder, smarter, not more hustle, more control. I stopped calling it starting over and started calling it building. I opened my first real bank account, then another envelope for savings. I wrote down every dollar I spent, not to punish myself, but to see patterns. That tiny notebook became my first weapon, and I guarded it hard. And that raises the real question. What was the first decision that turned all that chaos into momentum? The pivot, one decision that changed the next decade. The pivot didn't look heroic. It looked like me sitting on a stained mattress with a pen, writing 2 lists, things that keep me alive and things that keep me stuck. Most people think the answer is work harder. I was already working hard. Hard work without direction just makes you tired in more places. My problem wasn't effort. It was that my income didn't stack. Every job I took reset me to 0. So I made one decision that felt boring and scary. I stopped chasing the fastest money and committed to the most reliable ladder I could find. For me, that ladder started at a community college bulletin board and a guy at the temp agency who said, "If you can show up sober and on time, a warehouse will train you." I took the interview, swallowed my pride, and said yes to the shift nobody wanted. Nights. Night shift meant less competition and a small pay bump, but it also meant I had to build my life like an adult. Sleep schedule, meal prep, no late hangouts, no drama. I couldn't afford to be the person who's always dealing with stuff. The first paycheck wasn't magic. It was just predictable. And predictable is where power begins. Because when you know what's coming in, you can finally tell your money where to go instead of watching it disappear. I opened a checking account and a savings account at the same bank and named the savings one "Do Not Touch." Corny, but it worked. Every payday before I paid anybody else, I paid future me $20. Then 40. Then 100. Not because I was suddenly disciplined, but because I automated it. I turned willpower into a system. Next, I got ruthless about leaks. Convenience store snacks. Random Uber rides. Little treat-yourself moments that were really just stress purchases. I didn't ban fun. I just stopped buying comfort at retail prices. Then came the harder boundary. People. There were friends who loved me, And there were friends who loved the version of me who could be talked into anything. If your life is unstable, chaos feels like company. I had to cut that. I stopped answering calls after midnight. I stopped loaning money I didn't have. I stopped explaining myself to people who only listened for weaknesses. That's when something weird happened. The more consistent I got, the less I needed to prove anything. I didn't need to argue with my stepmother in my head. I didn't need to win imaginary debates in the shower. I started collecting real proof, pay stubs, a growing credit score, a resume that didn't look like a patchwork quilt. I picked one skill to stack on top of the job: forklift certification. Not glamorous, but it made me harder to replace. It was the first time I understood compounding. One certificate turned into better shifts. Better shifts turned into better managers. Better managers turned into references. References turned into options. And options are the opposite of being trapped. I also started treating my phone like a tool, not an escape hatch. Instead of scrolling at 1 a.m., I watched videos on budgeting and read the fine print on everything. I learned what overdraft fees really are, how interest works, and why being broke is expensive on purpose. I started writing down every expense the second it happened, no exceptions ever. I got a secured credit card with a $200 limit and used it like it was radioactive. Gas only. Paid it off every week. It wasn't glamorous, but each on-time payment was me building a reputation with a system that didn't care about my childhood. And I stopped waiting for permission to grow up. I filed my own taxes. I scheduled my own doctor appointment. I kept a calendar. Those tiny adult moves didn't feel like freedom in the moment, but they added up to something huge. I wasn't improvising anymore. I was operating. Around that time, I drove past my old neighborhood by accident. Same street sign, same trees. I felt that old heat rise in my chest, and then I noticed something new underneath it: calm. Because for the first time, the thought wasn't "they did me wrong." The thought was, if I want to go back, I could. That night, I wrote a sentence at the top of my notebook: return on my terms. Not to apologize, not to ask for a room, not even to fight, to choose. The goal wasn't vague anymore. It wasn't be successful. It was specific, measurable, and petty in the best way. One day, I'm going to own the place that made me feel homeless. So what did I do differently, specifically, that took me from scrambling month to month to building real leverage? Building the comeback money, credit, and quiet power. Once I had a steady check, the temptation was to finally breathe. New shoes, better phone, a car with working AC. And I get it. When you've been broke, spending feels like proof you're safe. But safety isn't what you buy once. It's what you build quietly, month after month, when nobody's watching. So I treated money like a vote. Every dollar said either, I'm still the kid with a trash bag, or I'm the adult who owns the door. First brick, an emergency fund. Not a dream fund, not a vacation fund. Panic fund. I started with $500 because 500 is the difference between a bad week and a life spiral. I kept it boring, in a separate savings account, no debit card attached. If I couldn't touch it easily, I couldn't talk myself into touching it. Second brick. Credit, the thing nobody teaches you until you need it. I kept that secured card, then upgraded to a regular one, and I made myself one rule. I never used it for a problem I couldn't solve with cash. Credit wasn't a lifeline, it was a resume. Low utilization, automatic payments, no late fees. Sounds tiny, but a year of perfect payments does something to your brain. It tells you, I follow through. Third brick. I stopped letting my lifestyle inflate every time my paycheck did. The raises came, and with them the little voices. You deserve it. You've earned it. Sometimes those voices are right. Most of the time, they're salesmen. I picked one upgrade per year, one. Everything else went to the boring stuff. Debt zero, emergency fund bigger, savings growing. I also learned how to say no to the traps that look like adulthood. Financing furniture. Leasing a car you can't afford. Paying for everyone at dinner to feel important. I'd watched my dad give away power one payment at a time. I wasn't doing that. Instead, I did the unsexy upgrades that actually change your life. I got a cheap used car I could buy outright, even though every part of me wanted something shiny. I moved into a tiny studio with mismatched furniture and a door that locked, and I treated that lock like luxury. I didn't celebrate with drinks. I celebrated by setting up autopay so rent was never late. I started reading my pay stub like a detective. Overtime rate, taxes, insurance. If a number looked off, I asked. Most people are embarrassed to ask about money, which is exactly why companies and banks get away with so much. I wasn't embarrassed anymore. When my job offered a 401k match, I joined even though it felt ridiculous to think about retirement when I just escaped homelessness. But that match was free money, and free money is a cheat code. I kept contributions small, just enough to qualify, and I let time do its thing. And every few months, I practiced the habit that would later matter most. I sat down, updated my net worth on one sheet of paper, and asked, if I lost my job tomorrow, how long could I hold on? That question kept me honest. It also kept me patient because patience is how you turn a paycheck into a down payment. Then I got specific about the comeback goal. People think buying a house starts with Zillow. It doesn't. It starts with paperwork. I pulled my credit report and corrected errors. I kept my job history clean, no hopping unless it was a clear step up. I saved every pay stub like it was evidence in court because one day it would be. And I studied ownership like it was a language. What's a down payment? What's PMI? How escrow works? What a mortgage broker does versus a bank. I learned that the house wasn't just a building. It was a contract. And contracts don't care who your stepmother is. They care about your numbers. I started putting my savings into buckets. One bucket for emergencies. One for a down payment. One for closing costs, because nobody warns you about those until you're already committed. I set a number and treated it like rent. Due every payday. There were months I hated it. Friends were taking trips, posting photos, buying toys. Meanwhile, I was eating chicken and rice like it was a religion. But every time I wanted to quit, I'd picture that candle on my 18th birthday cake and the trash bag on the table. That memory was expensive, but it paid interest. The weirdest shift was emotional. The more my accounts grew, the less I needed to talk about it. Early on, I wanted to announce, watch me. But announcing is for ego. Building is for results. If you tell the wrong people your plan, they don't just doubt you. They compete with you, sabotage you, or pressure you to share what you're saving. Silence was protection. So I kept my head down. I kept being fine. I let people underestimate me because underestimation is peaceful. Nobody asks you for favors when they think you're barely getting by. And yes, I thought about the house. Not every day, but often enough that it stayed sharp. I didn't want to buy it to kick anyone out. I wanted to buy it to take the word "my" back. She used that house like a leash. I wanted to turn it into a receipt that said, you were wrong about me. By the time I was getting close, I wasn't dreaming anymore. I was preparing. I was lining up financing. I was learning timelines. I was making sure that if the opportunity appeared, I could move fast. And that's why I didn't announce the goal. Because I wasn't preparing for a conversation. I was preparing for a transaction. So what exactly was I setting up behind the scenes, and how close did I get before I finally went back? The return at 28, same street, different person. 10 years is enough time for a neighborhood to change, but not enough for your body to forget. When I turned onto that street at 28, my hands tightened on the steering wheel like they expected to be punished. Same cracked sidewalk. Same line of mailboxes. Even the same oak tree leaning over the curb, throwing shade on the exact spot I used to stand with a trash bag full of clothes. The houses looked freshly painted in places, new cars and driveways, but the air smelled the same. Cut grass, hot asphalt, somebody's laundry detergent drifting from an open window. I slowed down and let the memories hit in waves. There was the corner where I used to wait for the bus, pretending I wasn't counting coins. The driveway where my dad taught me to ride a bike, back when family was still a word I trusted. The front window where my stepmother used to stand, arms crossed, watching me walk up like I owed her an apology for existing. It's weird what sticks with you. Not the big fights, the tiny humiliations. The way you learn to swallow your voice so you don't start something you can't finish. And I'll be honest, part of me wanted the movie version. I wanted to pull up, knock, and deliver a speech so sharp it would echo through the walls. I wanted her to feel, for 1 minute, the helplessness she'd fed me for years. That's the closure fantasy. It's clean. It's satisfying. It makes you the hero and them the villain, and the credits roll with you walking away taller. But closure in real life is messy. It doesn't come with music. It comes with paperwork, bank transfers, and a heart that still remembers being 18. I wasn't coming back to trade insults. Insults don't change ownership. I came back because I'd finally built something she couldn't dismiss. Options. Money in the bank. Credit that didn't flinch. A job history that told the world I show up. The kind of quiet power that doesn't need permission. I parked a block away and sat there, just breathing. Not because I was scared of her, because I was scared of me. Scared of slipping into the old version of myself who begged to be treated fairly. I looked down at the folder on the passenger seat. Pre-approval letter, contact info, notes from my agent, everything lined up like a plan and not a tantrum. That folder was the real comeback, not the dramatic moment at the door. The door was just the last step. Here's what I was preparing for behind the scenes. I wasn't showing up with "Can we talk?" energy. I was showing up with "Who's authorized to sign?" energy. I had already checked public records. I knew whose name was on the deed. I knew the rough value. I knew what I could offer and how fast I could close. If she tried to stall, I could wait. If she tried to shame me, I could smile. If she tried to rewrite history, I didn't have to argue. I had numbers. When I finally walked up, my feet remembered the path. Step, step, pause at the third crack in the concrete. My chest did that familiar tight thing like it was bracing for impact. I could hear a TV inside, muffled. A dog barked 2 houses down. Somewhere, a lawn sprinkler clicked on and started its lazy rhythm. Everything was ordinary, which made it more surreal. This place had been the center of my fear, and now it was just a house. I stood on the porch and looked at the doorbell. The same one. A little sun-faded, slightly crooked. I thought about the last time I walked through that door with permission. I thought about the first time I realized permission was the point. That was her whole game. Make you ask, then make you feel small for asking. My hand hovered, then knocked. Not a polite tap. A firm knock like a person who belongs on the other side of the conversation. While I waited, I felt 3 emotions fighting for the steering wheel inside me. Vengeance whispering, make her pay. Peace whispering, don't give her your energy. And proof, the calmest voice of all, saying, just do what you came to do. I'd rehearsed 100 lines on the drive over, and I threw them all away. I wasn't going to negotiate my worth with someone who enjoyed denying it. My realtor was waiting a few minutes down the road, ready to step in the second this became business, with forms ready in hand. That was the boundary. If it turns into a fight, I leave. No raised voices, no begging, no explaining the past. Just one question, delivered clean. Is the house for sale? The lock turned. The door opened a few inches. And there she was, framed by the hallway light, still wearing that same expression she used to practice for company. For half a second, her eyes flicked over me like she was trying to place a face from an old photo. Then they sharpened, not with warmth, with calculation. And in that instant, I realized the real question wasn't whether I'd be brave enough to face her. It was whether she would see me as a person or as a threat. Buying the house, the power shift in real time. She opened the door wider, then stopped, like her body recognized the situation before her brain wanted to. Can I help you? She said, polite enough to be believable, sharp enough to warn me. I didn't give her the speech I'd imagined at 20. I didn't even step inside. I'm here about the listing, I said. I'd like to make an offer. Her eyes flicked past me, like she expected a realtor with a clipboard. When she didn't see one, she tried to regain the old script. This isn't a good time, she said. And I don't know what you think you're doing. What I was doing was refusing to argue on her turf. It'll take 2 minutes, I said. If you're selling, I'm buying. If you're not selling, I'll leave. That sentence changed the air. Not because it was rude, because it gave her no handle, no emotion to grab, no opening to call me disrespectful and make herself the victim. She scoffed and said the phrase I'd heard 1,000 times. "This is my house." I nodded like she'd said the weather. "Right now it is. That's why I'm talking to you." That's the difference between winning an argument and changing the rules. An argument happens in your throat. A rule change happens on paper. I pulled the folder from under my arm and set it on the porch rail. Pre-approval letter. Proof of funds. A clean offer already filled out, ready for signatures. Not a threat. Not a flex. Just a fact. For a second she looked at it the way a person looks at a fire alarm. Like if she ignored it, it wouldn't be real. "What is this?" she asked, even though she knew. "It's an offer at market price," I said. "No games. Fast close. No repairs requested. You pick the move-out date." Her mouth tightened. "You can't afford this." I slid the pre-approval forward with one finger. "The bank disagrees." That's when I saw it. The flicker of fear behind her confidence. She'd spent years telling herself I'd crash, that I'd come back to borrow money, not bring it. She tried a different angle, softer. "Why would you do this?" she asked, like she was concerned for my mental health. "You should move on." I almost laughed because moving on is easy for the person who never paid the price. "This is moving on," I said. "It's just permanent." She didn't invite me in. I didn't ask. I called my agent and had him walk up the driveway like this was what it was. Business. He introduced himself, shook her hand, and spoke in that calm, legal tone that makes manipulative people short-circuit. No history, no drama, just terms. She tried to steer it back into family. "His father," she started. My agent cut in politely. "We can keep it simple. Here's the purchase price. Here's the earnest money. Here's the closing timeline." Watching her lose control wasn't loud. It was quiet. She couldn't punish a contract. She couldn't ground an adult with financing. She couldn't slam a door on a process that didn't require her feelings. The negotiation lasted a week. Not because I was uncertain, but because she needed time to decide what story she wanted to tell herself. Counteroffer, tiny. I accepted. She asked for a longer move-out window. I gave it, not out of kindness to her, but because I wasn't trying to win the moment. I was trying to win the outcome. She called me twice during that week. The first time she tried to sound maternal. "This is unnecessary," she said. "Your father would be devastated." The second time the tone flipped. "If you walk in here like you own the place, don't expect a welcome." I didn't debate either version. I just replied, "All communication through my agent, please." That sentence felt cold, but it was the first boundary she couldn't step over. When the earnest money cleared, I watched the confirmation email like it was a scoreboard. Not because I wanted her to lose, but because I needed to know the deal was real. At 18, everything could be taken back. This couldn't. Then came closing day. A plain office, beige walls, a stack of documents thicker than my entire life at 18. The title agent slid papers across the table and said, "Initial here, sign here." No one cared about the backstory. The system only recognizes signatures. My stepmother sat across from me, pen in hand, doing her best to look bored. But her fingers trembled when she turned pages. Every initial was another inch of ground she couldn't reclaim with words. At one point she looked up, as if she might say something that would slice me open. Maybe an apology, maybe a dig, maybe a last attempt to make it about character instead of capital. She didn't. She just signed. And I did too, steady. Not because I was fearless, because I'd been afraid for a decade, and I was tired of it. When the last page was done, the agent smiled and said, "Congratulations, the house is yours." Yours. One word that hit harder than any insult she'd ever thrown at me. Outside, the keys felt small in my palm, ridiculous for something that heavy. I walked up to the front door alone. Same steps, same knob. But this time, when I unlocked it, I realized the door had never been the power. The power was being the person who decides what opens and what closes. I didn't stand in the hallway and deliver a monologue. I didn't post it online. I just stepped inside and let the silence settle. Because here's the part nobody warns you about. The moment you get what you wanted, the old pain doesn't vanish. It waits. It asks, quietly, now what? After you win, what do you do with the feelings you expected victory to erase? Aftermath, the unexpected part of getting what you wanted. After the closing, I expected fireworks inside me. Relief, triumph, some clean movie feeling that would rewrite the last 10 years in one swipe. Instead, I walked into an empty house and heard my footsteps echo, and all I could think was, this is it? The place smelled like dust and old cooking grease. The walls were the same beige that used to make everything feel temporary. Sunlight came through the blinds in thin stripes, landing on spots where furniture used to sit. I stood in the living room and my brain did this weird thing where it played two timelines at once. Me at 18, outside on the porch with a trash bag, and me now holding keys like they were nothing. I went room to room, not inspecting property, but checking ghosts. Here's where I used to sit and do homework while she cleaned around me like I was a stain. Here's the hallway where I learned to listen for her car. Here's the kitchen where my house became her favorite sentence. And the wild part was owning it didn't erase any of that. It just made it quieter. That night I sat on the floor with a fast food burger and felt something I didn't expect. Grief. Not for the house. For the version of me that thought if I could just prove her wrong, I'd finally feel safe. I'd spent years imagining the payoff would be loud. It wasn't. It was calm, and calm made room for everything I'd been outrunning. My stepmother didn't call to congratulate me. She called to manage the story. The first message was icy, I hope you're happy. The second, a few days later, was suddenly cheerful, like she'd switched masks. You know, I always said you'd do fine if you applied yourself. Like she'd been my coach, not my executioner. Like throwing me out was tough love, not a power play. Old me would have argued. I would have listed receipts, dates, exact words. I would have fought for her to admit it. New me didn't need her admission. I texted back one line, I'm handling the move-in logistics through my agent. Take care. No emotion. No hook. She tried again through my dad. He called voice tight, asking why I was doing this. He wasn't angry exactly, more confused. Like he still wanted the family to stay in the old shape, even after it cut me. I told him the truth I'd never said out loud. I'm not doing it to punish you. I'm doing it so nobody can ever tell me I don't belong anywhere again. There was a long silence. Then he said, I should have stopped it. Not dramatic, just exhausted. I didn't forgive him on the spot. I didn't slam him either. I just said, yeah, you should have. And for once, I let that be enough. Over the next week, I changed the locks. I set up utilities in my name. I fixed a squeaky hinge that had driven me crazy as a teenager. Tiny things, but each one was a message to my nervous system. This is stable now. This is yours. Not rented, not borrowed, not conditional. The real victory wasn't watching her squirm. It was realizing I didn't need her to. I wasn't that kid anymore. I wasn't asking to be chosen. I was choosing myself in the most unromantic way possible. Insurance policies, mortgage payments, a home that couldn't be used as a threat. And once the adrenaline wore off, a bigger question showed up, quieter than revenge. What do you do with a symbol once it stops being a weapon? I walked into my old bedroom and laughed because the closet still stuck unless you lifted the door. On the wall, under a layer of newer paint, I could still see the faint pencil line where I'd measured my height at 16. I ran my thumb over it and felt my throat tighten. That line wasn't about growth. It was about time passing in a place that never felt safe. For a moment I wanted to call her, drag her back, and make her look at it. Then I realized that urge was the last chain. I don't need witnesses to validate what happened. I need a future that doesn't repeat it. Owning the house was proof. Keeping my peace was victory. So what's the real ending here? Do I keep the house, sell it, or turn it into something that finally feels like home? Takeaways/outro, the blueprint you can steal. If you've listened this far, here's what I wish someone had told me the day I stepped off that porch with my life in a trash bag. First, Don't confuse being treated unfairly with being powerless. Unfair is emotional. Power is practical. The moment I stopped trying to win arguments in that house and started building leverage outside it, the whole game changed. Leverage is cash, credit, skills, and options. It is the ability to say no and mean it. Second, pick one lane that compounds. Not 10 hustles that reset you to zero. A job that pays on time beats a dream that pays later. A certificate beats motivation. A steady resume beats a dramatic story. The goal is boring progress you can repeat. Third, build a safety floor before you build a lifestyle ceiling. Emergency fund first, then debt, then credit, then down payment. Most people do it backwards. They buy comfort and call it success. Then one surprise bill sends them back to fear. Fourth, protect your peace like it is part of the plan, because it is. If someone only calls when they need something, that is not family. That is a bill collector with a shared last name. You can love people and still stop giving them access to your life. Boundaries are not revenge. They are maintenance. Fifth, stay quiet while you build. Announcing your comeback feels good, but it invites opinions, pressure, and sabotage. Silence is not weakness. Silence is focus. Let the results make the noise. And finally, don't chase closure from the person who benefited from your pain. Closure is not an apology. Closure is stability. It is paying your rent on time. It is sleeping without listening for a car in the driveway. It is owning something, even if it is small, that cannot be taken from you on a bad day. That front door I talked about at the beginning was never just a door. It was a test. Could I be convinced that I was temporary? At 18, I believed it. At 28, I proved it was a lie, not with a speech, but with a signature. So if you are at your 18 moment right now, here is the first move your future self will thank you for. Write down your next 72 hours. Where you will sleep, what you will eat, how you will get to work or school, and which one person you can ask for a single night, not a rescue. Then write down your next one skill, one job, one system for saving, and one boundary you will enforce. Here's a simple way to think about it.